1. Founding myths and early kings. The story of Rome begins not with plain history, but with myth, tales that the Romans themselves cherished and retold for centuries. They believed their ancestors descended from Aeneas, a Trojan hero who fled the burning ruins of Troy and carried his people to Italy. From this noble bloodline, generations later, came the twins Romulus and Remus. Abandoned as infants and left to die on the banks of the river Tiber, the brothers were said to have been miraculously saved by a she-wolf, who nursed them until a shepherd took them in. This myth wasn't simply a bedtime tale. It was Rome's origin story, designed to remind Romans that their destiny was born from hardship, resilience, and divine favor. As the legend unfolds, Romulus and Remus decide to build a city together, but quarrel over where it should stand. In the end, Romulus kills Remus, becoming the sole founder of Rome in 753 BCE. From the very beginning, violence, ambition, and the struggle for supremacy were woven into the fabric of the Roman character. Romulus then became the first king, establishing not only the boundaries of the city, but also its earliest traditions. The Senate of 100 men, the first legions of citizen soldiers, and even the controversial act of abducting women from neighboring tribes to ensure Rome's population could grow. This story, though mythical, carried lessons about strength, unity, and determination that Romans saw reflected in their later history. The monarchy that followed Romulus lasted for over 2 centuries, with 6 more kings shaping the city. Numa Pompilius, Rome's second king, was remembered for bringing religion, temples, and the calendar to the people. Tullus Hostilius emphasized war and conquest, while Ancus Marcius expanded Rome's territory and built bridges across the Tiber. The final 3 kings, including Tarquinius Priscus and Servius Tullius, added monuments, walls, and political reforms. But the last, Tarquinius Superbus, Tarquin the Proud, was remembered for his arrogance and cruelty. His abuses drove the Romans to revolt in 509 BCE, swearing never again to submit to a king. That rejection of monarchy would define Rome's next era, the Republic. 2. The Roman Republic. The fall of Tarquin ushered in a bold new experiment, the Roman Republic. Unlike the monarchy, this new system was built to prevent the concentration of power in any one person's hands. Instead of kings, Rome elected 2 consuls every year. These consuls were equals who could veto each other, ensuring balance. They commanded armies, presided over the Senate, and executed the laws. Their short 1-year term made it nearly impossible for them to turn into tyrants. It was a radical idea in the ancient world, where most nations were ruled by monarchs, and it became the foundation for Rome's political culture for nearly 5 centuries. Beneath the consuls, the Senate carried enormous influence. Though it did not technically rule, the Senate advised on policy, controlled finances, and guided Rome through crises. Senators were drawn from aristocratic families, the patricians who dominated political life in the Republic's early centuries. But the common people, the plebeians, demanded a voice as well. This conflict, called the Conflict of the Orders, stretched across generations. Plebeians gained victories one by one: the right to elect tribunes who could veto unjust laws, the publication of the 12 Tables so all citizens could see the laws, and eventually access to the highest offices of state. By the 3rd century BCE, plebeians and patricians had found a rough balance, though the rich still held most of the power. The Republic was not static. It was constantly tested by war, expansion, and ambition. The system of checks and balances kept Rome stable for centuries, but also created gridlock in times of crisis. Consuls and magistrates rotated quickly, meaning strong leadership was often fleeting. Ambitious generals, commanding loyal legions, began to overshadow the authority of elected officials. As Rome expanded, the Republic struggled to govern distant provinces and manage the flood of wealth, slaves, and corruption that poured into the city. The Republic gave Rome its structure and ideals: law, citizenship, civic duty, but in time, it also created the conditions that would allow powerful individuals to rise above the system itself. 3. The Senate and Roman law. The Senate was the backbone of Roman political life. Though its official role was to advise magistrates, in practice it became the true governing body of Rome. Senators were drawn from Rome's most prestigious families and served for life, which gave the Senate continuity and authority across generations. The Senate handled foreign policy, finances, and the administration of provinces. When Rome was threatened, it was the Senate that directed the consuls and generals to defend the state. Its long memory and deep ties to tradition gave it immense weight, even when official power was limited. For Romans, the Senate symbolized stability and wisdom, even if, at times, it also symbolized corruption and elitism. Roman law, meanwhile, was one of the greatest achievements of the Republic. The 12 Tables, created in the mid-5th century BCE, were the first attempt to make the laws public and accessible, ensuring that even the poor knew their rights. Over the centuries, Roman jurists expanded these laws, addressing issues of contracts, property, inheritance, and citizenship. What made Roman law so enduring was its practicality. It was designed not just for Rome itself, but for the vast and diverse peoples who came under Roman rule. To govern an empire stretching from Britain to Syria, the Romans needed a legal system that could be applied universally yet flexibly. This universality became the hallmark of Roman law. By the late Republic and into the Empire, Roman law had grown into a sophisticated system that influenced nearly every modern Western legal tradition. The ideas of legal precedent, natural law, and the rights of citizens all stem from Roman practice. Even after the political power of Rome collapsed in the West, its laws were copied, studied, and revived for centuries. The Senate, too, though weakened under the emperors, remained a symbol of Roman governance. Together, the Senate and the law gave Rome its character, an empire built not only on conquest, but on institutions that outlasted its own political life. 4. The Roman military. If Rome had one true secret to its rise, it was the army. The Roman military was not only disciplined, but also highly adaptable, learning from enemies and refining its tactics. The legion became the most formidable fighting unit of the ancient world. Each legion consisted of about 5,000 soldiers, divided into cohorts and centuries that could act independently or in unison. The Roman soldiers' equipment, short stabbing sword, gladius, throwing javelin, pilum, shield, scutum, and armor, was designed for close combat and relentless discipline. Unlike many armies that relied on courage and brute strength, Roman legions fought in coordinated ranks, with every soldier trained to hold the line. The army was also the great builder of Rome's empire. Soldiers did not only fight, they constructed roads, bridges, forts, and aqueducts as they marched. Roads connected distant provinces and allowed armies to move swiftly, but they also spread trade, culture, and communication. Roman camps, built with military precision, often became permanent towns. In this way, the army was a force of civilization as much as destruction. Soldiers also spread Roman citizenship. Veterans were granted land in conquered territories, helping Romanize entire regions. Wherever the army went, Roman language, customs, and institutions followed. The military also reshaped Rome's politics. In the Republic, service was a duty of citizens, but over time, generals began recruiting landless men, turning armies into professional forces loyal not to the state, but to their commanders. This shift had dramatic consequences. Figures like Marius, Sulla, Pompey, and Julius Caesar commanded armies that gave them political power. The Republic, designed to avoid kingship, fell victim to the very force that had built its greatness. Even so, under the emperors, the army ensured stability for centuries, defending borders from Britain to the Middle East. Rome's military discipline, organization, and engineering left a legacy still studied by soldiers today. 5. Expansion and the Punic Wars. Rome's ambitions brought it into conflict with other powers, and none were more dangerous than Carthage. Located in North Africa, Carthage was a wealthy maritime empire controlling trade across the western Mediterranean. The First Punic War, 264 to 241 BCE, began over control of Sicily. Rome, initially inexperienced at sea, built its first major navy and shocked the world by defeating Carthage. Victory brought Sicily, Rome's first overseas province, and set the stage for further expansion. It also marked a turning point. Rome was no longer a regional power, but a contender for dominance across the Mediterranean. The Second Punic War, 218 to 201 BCE, became legendary for the feats of the Carthaginian general Hannibal. Marching from Spain, he crossed the Alps with elephants, a daring move that stunned Rome. Hannibal inflicted devastating defeats, most famously at Cannae in 216 BCE, where tens of thousands of Romans were killed in a single day. Yet Rome's resilience was unmatched. Refusing to surrender, the Romans adapted their strategies, avoided direct battles, and eventually sent Scipio Africanus to attack Carthage itself. In 202 BCE, Scipio defeated Hannibal at Zama, securing Roman supremacy in the western Mediterranean. The Third Punic War, 149 to 146 BCE, was short and brutal. Rome besieged Carthage and, after fierce resistance, destroyed the city entirely. Survivors were enslaved, and the land was declared cursed. On the same year, Rome also conquered Greece, absorbing its culture, art, and philosophy. By the mid-2nd century BCE, Rome had become the master of the Mediterranean, controlling vast territories from Spain to Asia Minor. The Punic Wars showcased both Rome's resilience and ruthlessness. They also set the pattern of future expansions: relentless wars, harsh conquests, and the incorporation of defeated peoples into the Roman system. 6. Daily life in Rome. While Rome was building its empire abroad, life within the city was a complex blend of grandeur and hardship. For the wealthy elite, life was filled with luxury: spacious villas with courtyards, mosaics, fountains, and servants. Meals included exotic delicacies, oysters, peacock, and imported spices. For the poor majority, life meant crowded apartments called insulae, often several stories tall and prone to collapse or fire. Meals were simple, usually bread, porridge, and vegetables. Yet even for the poor, Rome provided distractions: public baths, cheap food distributions, and, above all, entertainment in the arenas. Family life was central to Roman culture. The paterfamilias, or male head of household, held legal authority over his family. Women, while legally restricted, often wielded influence within the home and sometimes even in politics, particularly in elite circles. Children played with dolls, balls, and miniature weapons, preparing boys for the duties of citizenship and military service. Education varied by class. The wealthy hired tutors, often Greek slaves, while poorer children learned trades. Literacy was valued, especially for careers in administration, law, or the military. Religion was part of daily routine. Every household had a shrine to the Lares and Penates, guardian spirits of the home. Romans prayed and sacrificed to gods for health, prosperity, and protection. Daily life was also shaped by Rome's infrastructure. Aqueducts carried clean water into the city. Sewers like the Cloaca Maxima drained waste. Paved roads kept the bustling metropolis connected. Despite the challenges of overcrowding, Rome was the first true megacity of the ancient world, a place of astonishing contrasts: wealth and poverty, elegance and squalor, tradition and innovation. 7. Roman religion and festivals. Roman religion was deeply practical, focused on maintaining good relations with the gods. Unlike religions centered on faith or morality, Roman religion was about ritual and reciprocity. Diutida, I give so that you may give. The Romans adopted gods from neighbors and conquered peoples, blending them into their own pantheon. Jupiter was king of the gods, Juno the protector of women, and Mars the god of war. Temples dotted the city, and priests oversaw sacrifices to ensure divine favor. Augurs read the flight of birds, while haruspices examined animal entrails for omens. Religion was not just personal, but political. Wars, treaties, and elections were all sanctioned by the gods. Festivals marked the Roman calendar and brought communities together. Saturnalia in December was the most famous, a week of merriment where social roles were inverted. Slaves dined with masters, gifts were exchanged, and the streets filled with laughter. The Lupercalia in February was a fertility festival with rituals of purification and wild celebration. The Perilia honored shepherds and the founding of Rome, while the Vestalia paid tribute to Vesta, goddess of the hearth. These festivals gave Romans rhythm to their year, breaks from labor, and a sense of shared identity. Over time, religion evolved. As Rome expanded, it absorbed Greek gods, Egyptian cults like that of Isis, and Persian influences like Mithras. Eventually, Christianity appeared, initially persecuted as a threat to traditional order. Yet by the 4th century CE, under Emperor Constantine, Christianity was legalized, and by the end of the century, it became the state religion. This dramatic shift transformed Rome's spiritual life forever, but the old traditions left their mark, lingering in festivals and rituals that echoed for centuries. 8. Architecture and engineering. Rome was a civilization of builders. At the heart of its achievements stood its mastery of concrete, which allowed architects to create structures that were larger, stronger, and more enduring than anything before. With arches, vaults, and domes, the Romans could span wide spaces and support massive weights. Aqueducts, some stretching for miles, carried fresh water into cities, ensuring sanitation and public health. Roads, paved and carefully graded, connected distant provinces, allowing both armies and merchants to travel swiftly. Bridges spanned rivers, triumphal arches celebrated victories, and amphitheaters brought crowds together for entertainment. The Colosseum in Rome remains the most iconic monument of Roman engineering. Completed in 80 CE, it could seat over 50,000 spectators, with elevators and trapdoors for gladiators and animals. Its design was so advanced that its principles are still used in stadium construction today. The Pantheon, rebuilt by Emperor Hadrian, featured a massive concrete dome with an open oculus at its center, a feat of architecture that still inspires awe. Temples, basilicas, baths, and forums filled Roman cities, creating spaces for worship, leisure, and politics. Every Roman town, no matter how distant, bore the stamp of Roman design. Engineering extended to practical matters as well. The Cloaca Maxima, Rome's great sewer, kept the city livable. Roads were built so well that some remain in use today. Aqueducts, such as the Pont du Gard in France, still stand as monuments to Roman ingenuity. These works were not just functional, they symbolized Roman power and order. To build was to civilize, and to civilize was to rule. Even after the fall of Rome, its architecture inspired Renaissance artists and modern engineers alike. Roman engineering was the skeleton that held the empire together. 9. Entertainment and gladiators. Romans believed that leisure was essential to public life, but entertainment in Rome was unlike anything else in the ancient world. At the Circus Maximus, hundreds of thousands gathered to watch chariot races, where teams of horses thundered around the track at breakneck speed. The crowds roared for their favorite factions, red, blue, green, or white, and rivalries could even turn violent. Races were thrilling, dangerous, and deeply beloved, providing a release for both rich and poor. But it was the gladiatorial games that captured the Roman imagination most vividly. In amphitheaters across the empire, gladiators fought each other or wild animals in bloody spectacles. Some were slaves, criminals, or prisoners of war forced into the arena. Others volunteered, seeking fame and fortune. Gladiators trained in special schools, developing skills with swords, nets, tridents, and shields. The Colosseum staged elaborate shows, battles against exotic beasts, mock naval engagements, and executions of criminals. For the crowd, it was a chance to witness courage, skill, and the harsh realities of life and death. The games served political purposes as well. Emperors and magistrates sponsored spectacles to gain popularity, distract the populace, and demonstrate their generosity. The phrase bread and circuses captured the idea. As long as the people were fed and entertained, they would remain loyal. Yet gladiators also fascinated Romans as symbols of bravery and endurance. Though brutal, the games reflected Roman values, discipline, honor, and the acceptance of mortality. To us, they seem cruel, but to Rome, they were a celebration of the power of life and the inevitability of death. 10. Julius Caesar and the fall of the Republic. No figure looms larger in Roman history than Julius Caesar. A brilliant general, politician, and orator, Caesar rose to prominence through both military success and political alliances. His conquest of Gaul from 58 to 50 BC not only brought vast wealth to Rome, but also made him immensely popular among the people and his soldiers. His commentaries on the Gallic War showcased his achievements and secured his reputation. But his growing power alarmed many senators, who feared he aimed to make himself king. In 49 BCE, Caesar made his fateful decision. Ordered to disband his army, he instead crossed the Rubicon River with his legion, effectively declaring civil war. The phrase "crossing the Rubicon" has since become a symbol of irrevocable decision. Caesar defeated his rivals, including Pompey, and emerged as the dominant force in Roman politics. He was appointed dictator, first temporarily, then for life. His reforms were sweeping. He restructured debts, reformed the calendar into the Julian system, and expanded citizenship. To the people, he was a hero. To the Senate, he was a threat to the Republic itself. On the Ides of March in 44 BCE, Caesar was assassinated by a group of senators led by Brutus and Cassius. They believed they were saving the Republic, but instead they plunged Rome into chaos. Civil wars followed, and Caesar's heir Octavian eventually triumphed, becoming Augustus, the first emperor. The Republic, with its checks and balances, had collapsed under the weight of ambition, wealth, and military power. Caesar's life and death marked the end of one era and the beginning of another. 11. The Roman Empire and Emperors. With Augustus, Rome entered a new phase, the Empire. Augustus presented himself not as a king, but as the first citizen, carefully maintaining republican forms while holding supreme power. Under his reign, Rome enjoyed the Pax Romana, 2 centuries of relative peace and prosperity. The empire expanded its frontiers, reformed its administration, and fostered culture and literature. Writers like Virgil, Horace, and Ovid flourished, creating works that defined Roman identity for centuries. Successors varied in quality. Some emperors were capable and just. Trajan expanded the empire to its greatest extent. Hadrian consolidated its borders and built Hadrian's Wall in Britain. Marcus Aurelius embodied the philosopher king. Others were notorious. Caligula's madness, Nero's cruelty, and Commodus's vanity became legends of misrule. Yet the system endured. The emperor was more than a ruler. He was the commander-in-chief, the supreme priest, and the symbol of Rome's unity. While the Senate continued to exist, real power lay with the emperor and his bureaucracy. The empire was not just Rome itself, but a vast mosaic of cultures, languages, and peoples. Provinces were governed by Roman officials, but local traditions often persisted. Roman citizenship was gradually extended to more subjects, culminating in 212 CE when Emperor Caracalla granted it to nearly all free men in the empire. The Roman Empire became not just a political unit, but a cultural one, blending traditions from Europe, Africa, and Asia into a vast, interconnected world. 12. Decline and legacy of Rome. The decline of Rome was slow and complex. By the 3rd century CE, the empire faced constant pressure, invasions by Germanic tribes, economic troubles, and political instability. Emperors rose and fell with alarming speed, often murdered by their own soldiers. In 285 CE, Emperor Diocletian divided the empire into eastern and western halves to improve governance. The East, with its wealthy capital at Constantinople, thrived. The West, weaker and poorer, struggled to survive. Christianity, legalized by Constantine in the early 4th century, grew rapidly, reshaping the empire's culture and institutions. In 410 CE, Rome was sacked by the Visigoths, shocking the ancient world. By 476 CE, the last emperor of the West, Romulus Augustulus, was deposed. Yet the Eastern Roman Empire, later known as the Byzantine Empire, continued for nearly 1,000 years. Though the Western Empire fell, Rome's influence never disappeared. Its roads, aqueducts, and monuments endured. Its language, Latin, evolved into the Romance languages. Its legal system shaped Europe's laws. Its ideas of citizenship, governance, and civic duty influenced later civilizations, including the foundations of modern democracies. The legacy of Rome is everywhere, in our architecture, languages, governments, and literature. The rise and fall of Rome became a lesson for generations about power, ambition, and endurance. For nearly 1,000 years, Rome was the beating heart of the ancient world. Even after its political collapse, its spirit lived on, in a Renaissance that revived its art, in the laws and languages we still use today, and in the idea that one city could rule an empire and leave a legacy eternal.